Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for curious writers, readers, and cooks. I'm Kristin Donnelly, and I'm here with co-host Molly Stevens, and today we have a very special and maybe somewhat unexpected guest. Jenna Kutcher is a wedding photographer turned online entrepreneur. She has the hugely successful podcast, Goal Digger, and now she is an author. Her debut book, How Are You Really?, releases June 28th. Molly.
Yes, Kristin.
First of all, thank you for agreeing to have Jenna on Everything Cookbooks podcast. I know this is not our usual guest. She is not a cookbook author or recipe person.
But she does talk about food a lot in her writing and her blog.
She does. And what's funny is we mentioned her in our promotion episode because we had been watching the way she is promoting this new book, How Are You Really?
You know, I think it's a great idea to have her on. I can't wait to hear. I mean, she's doing so much around her book launch that's just creative and exciting and community driven. I think it'd be really fun to talk to her because, you know, it's not a cookbook, but she wrote a book and she's launching it and she's a first-time author. I'm expecting there's going to be a lot that people are going to get from this.
Agree. I heard about Jenna the first time several years ago, actually, through Beth Kirby, who was of Local Milk fame. And Beth very sadly passed away from cancer recently. She had this huge Instagram presence and she started to actually get more into business and the business side of what she did. And so sometimes on her podcast, she would talk about Jenna and Jenna's podcast. And so I was like, oh, I'll start listening to that.
This is the Goal Digger.
This is Goal Digger.
Yeah. A great name for a podcast.
Yeah. And it's funny with Jenna where it's like, you know, started listening to the podcast. And then I realized she actually had a class about podcasting. So that was the first class I took about it. I feel like just, you know, in this freelance life, I learn a lot from her about different ways we can get our voices out into the world and make some money.
Yeah. And talk about voices. I mean, she has such a distinctive voice that carries through and it's it's so approachable and welcoming. And one of the things that I really resonate that she talks about the benefits of a support system and how like mentorship and kindness comes in surprising ways and from surprising sources. And, I go back to the beginning of this podcast that we started as a group, a support group for each other and how much positivity that can create in your work and in your life. So for that, I mean, talk about positivity. Jenna is everything she puts out there has this positive energy around it. So, and I also, I'm interested in her making that transition because she's such a digital content creator and the difference. And I think she talks about this a little bit in the book creation process, but going from a digital content creation where, in 24 hours, whether it's been a hit, you get your likes, or something just disappears too, if it doesn't resonate. Right. Whereas the bookmaking process, as we talk about a lot on this podcast, is long and solitary. And so that's just such a different process for her. So I'd be interested to talk to her about, the difference between those two.
Yeah. It is interesting on her podcast, should other authors want to listen in. She has had her agent on, she has had her editor on, and then she recently talked about her own writing process. And she kind of did things backwards, which is really cool.
What do you mean by that?
So she wrote the manuscript, like she wrote the full book first, which is for nonfiction, usually we're like, write the proposal, find your agent. But she did not want the pressure of a deadline is what she said. Like she didn't want the pressure of a deadline. And
oh, that's right. And I think I remember her saying that she, one of her podcasts where she talks about the book, that she kept it a secret.
I know, from like almost everybody in her life. Yeah. Which is funny for somebody who does put so much out online. Yeah. To not talk about that was really interesting. I'm actually somebody where like a deadline helps me be more creative, but it sounds like in this case.
Yeah. It's very interesting, the whole, writing the book that you're meant to write. And I think she talks about that. And I think there's a lot in it. And the book is available now, right? We'll put it in the show notes where people can find it. But How Are You Really? It's a great title too. No, I'm excited to talk to her.
Cool. Well, here we go. Welcome, Jenna. We're so excited to have you. Thank you so much for being here.
No, thank you so much for having me.
Well, we are thrilled to have you. And we have a recent episode we just did on book promotion, which can be really uncomfortable for a lot of our introverted authors. So what would you say to authors who cringe about jumping into marketing themselves and their work? And do you have any advice about how to feel good about self-promotion?
Oh my gosh, yes, so much. So, one of the things, regardless of what style book you're writing, I feel like it's like two totally separate projects, right? Like the actual creation of the book itself and then the launching. And it's almost like two different sides of your brain. It's like the artistic, creative side, and then it's like the strategic, business minded side. And I think it can be really hard for artists and creative people to like shift from one to the other. For me, I had to fully compartmentalize each aspect of the process because when I started thinking about them at the same time, it was so convoluted. And for me, I had to really focus on like writing words that tell, not sell, and then selling the book like that I wrote. And that's like a really interesting thing. And I'm super introverted as well, which I think surprises a lot of people. But what I've really found is like selling is a service. And I know that's like a really interesting way to look at it. But for so many people, if I got a whole room specifically of women and said, how many people love to sell? Nobody would put their hands up. And I think a lot of times it's because we've been taught that like selling is spammy or it's salesy or it gives people an icky feeling. But when you recognize that the work that you've done in any scope of your work can make an impact, it's a service to sell that to people. And I have been in this business for a very long time and have learned very much that people that pay attention. And so if you have something that someone can pay for, they are far more likely to follow through, to get results, to implement than someone who just takes free content. There's no shortage of free knowledge out there. And so when you're asking someone to invest, it's not just an investment in you or your work, it's an investment in themselves that's going to inspire them to implement.
Oh, I love that. I think that's so helpful for people. There's something in your book where I guess it ties a little bit to like how you talk about writing the book and then promoting the book and those being separate. But an author actually just reached out to me because she said, I put my book out in the world and now it feels like nothing's changed in a way. And in the book, you have this chapter called Living the Dream, how to be where you are like right now. And you talk about this importance of being present, especially during moments when you're realizing a past dream. And so I'm wondering, what are some words of wisdom you might give to somebody to help them relish this success, this dream that they've had for a long time?
Yeah. Well, I would tell that person that maybe their why was off kilter. And what I mean by this is that a lot of times when we are ambitious, especially ambitious women, we set these goals, these things in our lives. And I don't know about you two, but I've arrived at some of those destinations and it didn't feel like I thought it would, right? Like I remember the first time I made six figures, I remember taking a shower with the same herbal essence and being like, why are the angels not singing? Like I thought I would just, my life would be different. And I think sometimes when we set these arbitrary goals or have these expectations, we're not actually staying in alignment with how do I want this to feel, right? So her saying like, I put the book out and I don't feel different, maybe tells me that like the goal was off, not the product, not the book, but maybe the goal was off. And so for me, there's that story in the book, and it's really talking about like when we are setting these goals or having these dreams, one of the most important things that we need to do is really ask ourselves, how do I want this to feel? Because society tells us that we need to sell X amount to be successful, or we need this arbitrary, like, bestseller title, or we need all these things for it to matter. But if we really tie it back to impact, it all starts with the impact of one. And for me, like when I look at my career, it was, one client that made all the difference. It was the first follower. It was the first student. It was all of these first people. And in a world that is so focused on the masses these days, we're like forgetting like the meaning behind the message. And so I think maybe her goal was like to sell a ton and then, my life would suddenly be different. But it's like, if we can focus and remember on like the power of impacting one life and that compounding rippling effect, it can totally transform how we experience when we achieve that. But it can also totally change how we set our goals in the first place. For me in this book, it's like, I just want to get it into so many hands and I want it to be a piece of people's lives. And I want it to change their trajectory, not because of me, but because of them taking action in their lives. And so it's something that it's not like, I don't want to ever look at someone and be like, Kristin, Molly, I'm so proud of you. I want to say, you should be so proud of yourself, because that's when you can truly take ownership of that goal. So I would just say, like, come back home to the why. Why do you want to feel different? What do you want to feel different? And maybe the how was off. And it doesn't mean that the book wasn't good or that it didn't make a difference. It just means maybe you were attached to the wrong result.
Yeah.
Interesting
way to think about, and go back to what you were talking about, how the book making process, the book writing is so different than the book launch.
Oh my gosh.
And I
so
love
different.
You recently on your podcast talked about expanding your audience as you were working on your book, which is such an interesting thing to think about, who your audience is. We're so fortunate to have you on Everything Cookbooks today because it's part of this book launch promotion that you're doing. And it's just we've been following your book launch, and there's so much buzz and anticipation. It's really exciting. And you're building that also intentionally. And we talked to our listeners about, how to get involved in your own book promotion. And I would love if you could share some of the strategies and what seems to be working for you and your team and your book right now.
Oh yeah. Ask me anything. Like, nothing is off limits when it comes to this. I love the strategy behind it. So one of the things that was really important to me is I'm so fortunate to have so many incredible authors in my life, but I've also watched them like drive their lives into the ground to get their book out into the world. Like, by the time their book is actually released, they're so tired about talking about it. And I'm like, I don't want that. Like, I'm in a season of life with 2 little ones, and like, I just want to be present and awake to like this full experience, and to do it in a way that only I can. And so one of the blessings in disguise of these last few years is like this realization that you can make such an impact from the comfort of your own home using digital tools. And so, gone are the traditional book tours that require you to be gone in every city. Right. And hello, we get to connect virtually. And so a few of the things that have been working really well. So we built out our launch team, and we did that really intentionally. And I think sometimes authors get really into their own strategy and forget how to explain what things mean to people not in this space. So there are so many terminologies for authors, from launch team or street team to pre-orders, to pre-order bonuses, to release dates, to pub dates. Like, there's this internal language that like the average person, your likely dream consumer, has no idea what any of that means, right? And so we had to be really thoughtful about like the sequence of how we were releasing things and the language around how we were releasing them to help people to understand, like, you're invited to be a part of this process. Here's what this part is going to look like. Here's what we're asking for this part. Here's how you support this part. And really making it so that it was so simple that like even a 3rd grader would understand it. And I think when you get so entrenched into a world, it's like, oh yeah, everyone knows what a pre-order is and everyone knows, and it's like, no, people actually do not know that. One of the things that I think is really fascinating for your listeners that I've been seeing inside of the publishing world, and maybe you have as well, is that gone are the days where people were pre-ordering so far in advance because we are such an immediate culture. Like, we order something on Amazon and it's to our door the next day. And so a lot of the publishing world is saying, like the 2 weeks leading up to your launch are the biggest, most critical period for that book buying. Anyone who orders before that, that's incredible. Those are your people who like you've already served so well. But we're seeing like a shorter runway in that timing before publication date, meaning too, like, you've got to think about, when you're thinking about promotion, it's like a runway. Like, how much steam do you have and how hard can you go? And I think I like set out really early in the promotion because I was like, I just want to do this in like a peaceful pursuit. Like, I want to do it in a way that like I'm not depleted at the finish line. I want to enjoy the finish line. The finish line is really just the beginning. And so really planning a lot of our promotion in those 2 weeks leading up to the book launch. And then also just equipping people like, here's how you can share. Here's how you can support. Here's what I need from you. And flexing that asking for help muscle, which is totally required, especially as a first-time author.
I'd like to actually add something, which when you say launch team, you're often talking about the people who follow you already and not necessarily the paid publicist and all of that. No.
These are like the grassroots humans.
And that is something that we've been watching, which is really innovative. And you using that, audience you've built over time.
Those are the people who just dove in. It was like, hey, I'm doing this thing. Will you help me? And it was like, yes. And I'm like, those are my people.
Right.
Those are my people.
Yeah. I'm happy to be on that team.
Yes, you are.
So you have such a distinctive voice as a writer.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering how you have honed that.
Well, do you really want to know? I literally blogged Monday through Friday straight for like 4 years when nobody followed. I mean, I don't even know what I wrote about because there was zero strategy behind any of it. But when I look at like my life's work, like so much of it was just consistently showing up and building up like that belief, that confidence that I can follow through on things. And so I have thousands of blog posts, 500 podcast episodes, like so much content out there. But I really, it's fascinating, and you guys will understand this as podcasters, is that when I write, I literally think about like what it will sound like when I speak it. Like when I was writing my physical book, I was really thinking about the audiobook version because I'm used to, my podcast and speaking with my voice. And so it ended up being so cool because when I recorded my audiobook, the producer was like, "Oh, wow, this is like unreal." And I was like, "Why?" And she's like, "Well, because like this is exactly how you speak. Like the minute we hit cut, you're still speaking in this way." And I was like, "Well, that's the only way that I know how to write is I write how I speak." And so I think it was just so much practice over the years, but also just really thinking about like, how am I going to speak? And I would say for a tip for your listeners is if you're ever staring like at a blinking cursor and you're like, I have no idea like what to say. I know I want to say something. Open up the voice note app on your phone and record it how you would speak it. And there are different ways that you can just transcribe it or just listen back to it and pull out the good parts of it. But a lot of my writing process, when I would get stuck or if I was like, I know I need a story about this thing. And then I would just hit record and just start talking and be able to like pull out like, okay, that was what I was trying to get at. And for me, I can speak sometimes better than I can write. And so it was like this beautiful mix of like the different mediums to get to like the heart of the message.
So interesting. Yeah, I've heard you say that you never thought you'd write a book. You swore you weren't going to write a book. Like it's like that.
Never.
And yet you've been writing and building and crafting this voice. And yet the book just feels like such a natural development in the work that you've put out there.
I literally have on the record me being like, nope. On stages, on podcasts and masterminds, I was like, never.
Well, I'm on the record saying I'd never do a podcast. So, it's so funny. And now
isn't it cool that we can change and evolve? I think we need to like welcome that a little bit more.
And embrace.
Yes.
100% things that we do. Yeah.
Sometimes we get questions about that evolution. Like, people don't want to be pigeonholed by their first book. Like, I wrote about potlucks one time. Do I always have to write about potlucks? I mean, I know I don't, but there is that anxiety. So I think that's something that's so reassuring in your book. Now, this is just a fun last question. You reference food so much in your writing.
Yes.
And in great specific detail too.
I know, beautiful detail. We are really curious about the role of food in your life.
I watch a lot of Food Network. I'm from the Midwest, and I just feel like food to me is like sitting around the table as a family. And it's something, as a mom that like every day when we have dinner together, it's like conversation, what was the highlight of your day? And like my 3-year-old will be like, what about you, Mom? And like, it's just become a part of our lives, but it's like that glue that gathers. And to me, like food has played different roles in my body image struggle throughout life as, rewards and punishments. But I've really come to this holistic place is like food is fuel and food is like this invitation to connect. And we watch a lot of Top Chef. And I pay attention to the words that people use to describe it because I think it's fascinating that you can, in cookbooks and on TV, someone can describe something and you can almost taste it yourself. Like there is such an art to it that I just respect. And so we were watching the Top Chef finale the other day and I was like, babe, let's like count how many adjectives the judges use to describe this food to make us feel like we're the ones tasting it. And so I just have so much respect for what you ladies do and how you teach because it is an art. And it's a beautiful art that really just invites people to get excited about something, but also to create this invitation to connect. And I think in this world, we are all craving this deeper connection. And I think food can be at the center of a lot of the tables that invite those conversations.
Ugh. It's so good.
Maybe there's a cookbook in your future, Jenna.
Oh, golly, no, I would be the worst. My husband does like all the cooking. I like cooking, but I'm messy in the kitchen and he is like very type A. And so he does the majority of the cooking because I'm apparently too messy when I cook.
That's beautiful.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to talk to you.
Oh my goodness. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, Molly, what did you think?
That was great, Kristin. That was so great to have her on. And it's incredible. Like, I don't think of her work as really aligning with the cookbook sphere, but it does. A book is a book.
Yeah,
And yeah.
a book is a book. And then I just think, in this world where we are authors, but now have to often think like marketers, she does bring that wisdom that I hope our listeners will appreciate.
Yeah. And her whole thing about her entrepreneurial life and how you make that work. And no, it was really great to have her on. And I think going forward, maybe we can, even reach out and interview. It doesn't have to all be in the cookbook sphere, right? There's so many other things that influence what we do. So that was really fun. It was great.
Totally. They say don't meet your heroes, but sometimes it's good too.
It's great. Thanks so much, Kristin.
Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. If you have questions about cookbooks or anything you've heard on the show, contact us through our website, everythingcookbooks.com. If you have a minute to spare, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. This helps more people find the show. Much gratitude to our editor, Abby Circatella. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.